Hey, Diva family. I just want to give a heads up that this episode contains descriptions of suicides and overdoses. And if you would find this challenging, you might want to skip this episode. Thanks for taking care of yourself, and I'll see you on the next episode. Welcome to episode 24, Diva family. We are in the last days of summer here, and the light is turning towards fall. But it is still a sweltering 80 something degrees in my office. So excuse the sweat for those watching on video. I decided to take last month, my birthday month, off from the podcast. So I am returning refreshed and energized with lots of new episodes ready for you. I spent August doing a deep cleanse of my office, and then I went back east to visit mom and show her the podcast episode I created around telling her about my psychedelic use. She gave it her nod of approval, so that feels good. So that mission from the universe is now complete and integrated. A big check off the cosmic to-do list. I am particularly excited about today's podcast guest, Rachel Harris. She's the author of Listening to Ayahuasca, New Hope for Depression, Addiction, PTSD, and Anxiety, and Swimming in the Sacred, Wisdom from the Psychedelic Underground. After Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, I think Swimming in the Sacred had the biggest impact on the psychedelic underground. In it, Rachel interviews 18 underground guides, all women, 15 of whom had worked in the underground for at least 20 years, and the other 3 for a decade. Not only is the book chock full of psychedelic wisdom and insights, but it set off quite the buzz in the underground as people tried to figure out who was who, since all the names were pseudonyms. I first met Rachel at a psychedelic gathering that I was co-hosting. I was particularly excited that she was coming because Rachel spends most of her time on a remote island in Maine. So getting to meet her in person was a particular treat. We then went to lunch with another dear psychedelic friend, Sylvia Tisson. And it was a delightful lunch, marred only by the incessant noise of the smoke alarm, which actually needed firemen to come turn off. Still, I thoroughly enjoyed the time I spent with Rachel and Sylvia. And afterwards, we went to the bookstore next door and found a copy of Swimming in the Sacred and turned it forward to give it more prominence. Those of you who get my newsletter got to see the photo of that. So let me tell you a little bit about Rachel's formal background. Rachel Harris, PhD, is a psychologist with both a research and a clinical background. She was in the 1968 residential program at Esalen Institute, Big Sur, California. During the decade she worked in academic research, Rachel received a New Investigators Award from the National Institutes of Health and published over 40 scientific studies in peer-reviewed journals. She was in private psychotherapy practice for 40 years. Welcome to Psychedelic Divas, Rachel.
Thank you, Carla.
It is such an honor to have you here.
Mm-hmm.
So you refer to the women in your book, Swimming in the Sacred, as psychedelic elders. And that's a title that you yourself qualify for.
Oh, no.
Not as a guide, but still a psychedelic wisdom keeper.
Well, mostly it's just being old.
Okay, well, that qualifies.
Oh,
Old
yeah.
and in the right place at the right time.
That's true.
All right, because I want to start with your time in the late 60s and 70s at Esalen. And
Oof.
you
I mean, it's now 60 years ago. I mean, let's get real. It's a long time ago.
I'm pretty sure there's an entire book about just that time. But
oh, God.
You say in the book that your therapeutic roots grew out of the soil at Esalen. And you lived there for years as a residential fellow and then as a staff member. So this is a big question. I know it could take the entire podcast, but can you describe what that time period was like and what you learned while you were there?
Well, it was 1968, right? So that's a while ago. And I graduated from college in 1968 at Boston University, drove cross country. I was 21 years old when I arrived at Esalen. It was a very macho community. I was lucky to be in, I think it was the third residential program. There were 11 of us who were handpicked for one reason or
Uh-huh.
another. And we were to work with really the top people in the different fields about 50 hours a week for 6 months. And in fact, we were the first residential program to actually stay together for the whole 6 months. The other programs fell apart. Nobody really knew how to run them. So these were really experimental and they didn't continue. So there was a very short lifespan for residential fellows. And then after that, they went to a work study program that they did know how to run. And that I think that still continues. But we had nothing to do but meet in a group and work with different leaders. So it and at age 21, I was all agog. I mean, this was my dream and I was thrilled to be there. And now, as an elder, as you say, or at least someone who's old, I look and now I've had 40 years doing psychotherapy. I had a private practice for 40 years. I can look back and say, what were they thinking? There was no integration. Big things would happen. People would fall apart. Nobody said the next day, "How are you doing?" It was the Wild West. You were really on your own. During the years I was there were a lot of suicides,
Mm.
and it was a very intense time of learning and growing, but also of being taken apart and tested.
Yeah.
And I was too young, really. And I spent many years kind of putting myself back together and figuring things out. But because it was 1968 to early 70s, 71, 72, something like that, there was no graduate program to go to. And because the graduate programs hadn't caught up with Esalen,
Right.
Esalen was way ahead of everybody. And so it was, I was sort of left somewhat adrift.
So,
So
and that is what happens, right? So you're on that leading edge that of like
leading edge. Yeah.
and then all the swampiness comes in, and as that leading edge, we all benefit from, but we benefit from the mess ups as much as from the positive learning.
It was a wild time. Yeah. There was a staff member, here's an example. There was a staff member who was working privately with Fritz Perls. He was there. He was really
Mhm.
the honcho there. And she hung herself. And Fritz was like, it's not my responsibility. N- uh, no, no sense of any care or anything. It's just what, I mean, while I was there was one school on the whole Big Sur coast, and the school teacher was addicted to heroin. I mean, it was just a wild time. And he and his buddies, mountain men from the mountains there, drove to Monterey. God knows what they were doing, and he overdosed. And his buddies rolled his body out of the car and left him in an alley. Now that was that, even though that didn't happen right at Esalen, that was the norm in that community. It was rough. And
See,
I was a
I
college kid. I wasn't prepared for this.
no, and I'm so appreciative because we have this
Yeah,
romanticization
right,
of
right.
of the 60s, and so much of it was a
Are you looking for
yes,
words?
well, yes,
So now the other side of it is I worked with psychedelics there because we had access to really good medicines. And I did it in nature. I mean, on a ridge in Big Sur, it couldn't be more beautiful. And always in a very spiritual context. So I also had that chance in a safe situation, fairly safe, to experience those realms. So that was an opening for me as well.
well, there were other teachers like Stan Groff that came through and
He
who
wasn't there
particularly
yet. No, no, he came later.
oh,
I think
okay,
he
all
I
right,
think he gave a one evening talk when I was
okay,
there where he
all right,
presented his theory, but he was in Maryland then.
okay.
I'm old. This was way back. I mean,
That's why you're a psychedelic elder.
I think the first or second week we went to sit with Suzuki Roshi at Tassajara. So it was a very spiritual approach to psychological work.
Mhm.
And so that pushed me so far ahead of where the graduate programs were. I was really out of sync with the major culture.
Which I'm assuming it sounds like was a blessing and a curse?
It was a blessing and it took a long time to integrate what happened there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Well,
part of the integration is I think during the 90s mostly, I went back to lead workshops and
mhm.
I would have a chance to visit with people who were there in the 60s. So people would kind of hear I was at Esalen. They would come down to have lunch with me or something like that. And this one guy who'd been there at the same time, he came in, and I just remember we sat on the lawn. It was one of these healing moments that doesn't make sense. It's not a rational moment, but it was healing. And we're sitting there, I don't know, we had lunch and we're just sitting and talking, overlooking the Pacific. And he acknowledges that the women were treated really badly.
Mm.
And he apologizes to me
Wow.
for all the men in
Wow.
just in general. And it was this really wonderful, sweet thing to do. So this was my going back there to lead workshops was the excuse, but it was for these moments of healing.
That's beautiful, and thank you for sharing that
Yeah.
because I mean that it is that it's that imbalance between the inner masculine and inner feminine, as well as the actual outer masculine and feminine. That's one of the reasons why I'm created this podcast, which is wisdom psychedelics through the wisdom of the divine feminine. So much has been through the the lens of the masculine, and not necessarily in a all positive way.
Well,
I
I see that moment in a smaller, more personal way. And what I was 40 years doing private practice psychotherapy, and the question is always, well, when is the person ready to terminate? And I would say when life itself becomes the therapist. And so that
Mm.
process of going back to Esalen in the 90s as a grown up in a different male-female era where that conversation could happen, that's where life was the big therapist for me. And so that was one of those healings. It doesn't make sense for one guy to apologize for everybody.
No.
And it's an irrational event that is very healing. And that's where life with a capital L becomes the therapist. It was bigger than just me and him.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
that's really beautiful. Can you give us, just share with the audience, a basic overview of your personal psychedelic journey? When did it start and what medicines have you taken?
I'm a very conservative psychedelic user, so we had access at Esalen to acid and mushrooms and what was then MDA, and that's what got tweaked a little bit to become MDMA.
Yes.
And so that was the time of experimentation, but I was doing it in nature. So we were not using the protocol that was developed that's used in the research studies.
Right.
So
No,
I had
that's
never done
way
that.
earlier. Right.
So when I was writing the book, it finally dawned on me I'm writing about something I've never done. Well, what's wrong with this picture? So I asked one of the elders to do an MDMA session with me because I had done MDA, although it's very similar. It's a little anyway. But this was at a time where I already had, let me think, about 15 years of working with ayahuasca
Mhm.
in an indigenous setting with an indigenous shaman. So that was a good number of ceremonies, a couple of times a year and over that 15 years. So then I do MDMA and I think this is going to be fun. It's going to be light and charming and fun. Finally, I'm not going to suffer. And so I'm on a mat under a blanket. I've got, eye shades, earphones. I go right into an ayahuasca space. It was miserable. And the content was mostly about death and dying. At one point, after like 5, 6 hours, I crawl into the bathroom. a sort of standard ayahuasca trope, you know. But usually people have a good time with this medicine.
That
That's where I went. So,
that's when it's used recreationally or in connection. But so many people who have done it, who are in the clinical trials, they come out and they say, I have no idea why that's called ecstasy.
ah,
So
well,
it is the
it's different.
intention,
Yeah.
and the work that's needed that comes through the medicine at the time. So
Well, it's like
uh,
I had a beeline to the
right,
ayahuasca space. So that
right.
was my experience. So I've never done that kind of stacking that's getting done where
Hmm.
there are different medicines used. So
Right.
that's not what I'm attracted to.
Okay.
So I've been very conservative and in a way very loyal to my relationship with the ayahuasca plant spirit.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your first book, Listening to Ayahuasca. So, as the title implies, the book is about listening to the
The book is
plant.
about the relationship with ayahuasca.
Yes, I like that. So, but
Yeah.
but you are listening. You're listening in that relationship. You're listening
Yes.
to the plant. You're listening to
Yes.
your unconscious. You're listening to whatever inner guidance that comes through ceremony and integration. Uh, so, in that book, you describe your decades-long
That
practice.
that was a little messy. That's my experience doesn't fit what you just described. I get plenty of insights and that sort of thing from my unconscious in dreams and other ways through therapy.
Right,
I don't hear voices. In an ayahuasca ceremony, I hear a voice that is not my own voice.
right.
So there is a relationship with that voice that I am calling the spirit of ayahuasca,
Yes.
the spirit of the plant. So that's very specific to me.
Yes.
Now
I
I forget where you were going,
No, that's all
but
right
that was
because it is that distinction that I'm going towards because it's the same thing. I've had the same experience, right? But you described when we talk about inner guidance, uh, you've spent a lot of time considering whether the messages you've received in psychedelic space are real and where they might have actually come from. And then you've tried to balance this concept of messages from spirit with your materialistic belief system.
yes, I've been tortured.
Yes, so that is where I was going, right? So it's
Yeah.
listening to ayahuasca. So how would you describe where you are now on that journey of balancing messages from the plant or spirit world with your more grounded, realistic worldview?
I've made progress slowly but surely. I don't know if your listeners will know the name Joe Tafur. He has a new book out, but he wrote A Fellowship of the River. So he's a Shipibo trained, he's a medical doctor and a Shipibo trained shaman. And because of his personal background, he had no trouble with shifting cultures and accepting the plants as real. So he has tracked my progress.
So you have external validation.
I never quite match him, but he does acknowledge I'm making progress. So I am a lot more fluid
Well,
than I used to be.
I spend a lot of time on this podcast and in my life, talking about my relationship with my guides. And I think that's something that's not normal. So
No.
this listening to the voices in our head for wherever they come from. So how would you describe it, your experience of that?
Well, I could contrast the writing of the two books. And with listening to ayahuasca, I had real palpable help. There was no question in my mind. I mean, at one point, I was saying, I was writing the chapter on neuroscience. This book was published in 2017, I think.
Mhm.
Now, when I was in graduate school, there was no neuroscience. The brain didn't change, it just shrunk.
Right.
So this was, I was reading stuff that I had no background in, and I wasn't totally sure. And so I was looking for a neuroscientist to vet that chapter. So I was asking around, and I finally I was exasperated, and I was saying, I'm 2 people away from the Dalai Lama, and I can't find a neuroscientist, and I'm in California. And an old Esalen girlfriend, by the way, so this is someone I've known for now 60 years, she says, I know a Berkeley professor who's a neuroscientist. So this happens to be David Presti. So I don't, you know the name. People in
I know
California
he's a
know
dear
the
friend.
name. Dear friend.
Yes.
And so I'd never met him. And he cold agrees to read this, what, 30-page chapter or so. And he corrected one of my references, the style of one of my references, but the chapter was good as it was. But I felt much better about it. I felt much more secure about it. So I feel like, boy, the juxtaposition of that was felt like I received help. When I was working on swimming in the sacred, I didn't have that kind of help.
Mm.
And I felt lonely. I
I'm sure
mean,
that's so
I
interesting
loved
because,
meeting everybody and sitting with
right,
everyone,
right.
but I felt lonely.
It's such an interesting juxtaposition because here you are having these in-depth personal conversations with the women in the book, but then going back in the actual writing process, not having that support of that. What I'm hearing is
No,
that of that
no,
inner messaging.
no, I didn't have it.
Yeah.
I really felt lonely. Yeah.
For your ayahuasca book, you did the largest study of ayahuasca use in North America. You spoke with hundreds of ayahuasca drinkers.
Yeah, I spoke with a lot of people. I still talk with people. I love hearing stories, but I did a little study with 81 subjects.
Okay.
No, but
So,
it's not controlled. It's a naturalistic study.
right. Right.
And the most important piece of that study was came from one of the women I interviewed as an elder a couple of years later. Back then she was a friend, and I was asking her, this is how I was taught to develop a research questionnaire. I was in a research office at a medical school. And so this is how I was taught, is that you go to people who are experts and you ask them about the topic you want to study and you say, what should I ask? So I asked her, and she said, ask them about their ongoing relationship with the spirit of ayahuasca. And I'm like, oh, what a good idea. I had about 2 or 3 years of experience with ayahuasca at that point when I started that study. So I just included that in the questionnaire. What the hell? It was already a 16-page questionnaire. It was ridiculous. And people filled it out and wrote me letters. I mean, it was amazing. So, but then when I analyzed the findings, I think it was 75% of the people reported an ongoing relationship with the spirit of ayahuasca. And that was a real crisis for me. I couldn't believe it. Now, I also had an ongoing relationship with ayahuasca. I don't know why I didn't expect other people to. But she's only talking to me? No. So, but that's, that doesn't fit our Western culture.
No.
So that many people reporting something that's outside the culture, it was astounding to me. And that's not really been pursued in the
No,
academic
there's no place.
research.
There's no place for that in academic research. And I love that you included that question.
Oh, I listened to the experts,
Yeah.
which it would be nice if the academic research offices would do that. That's the
Well,
nicest way I can put that.
that's the nicest way of saying that. That is a very polite.
Oh, good.
Uh,
I try. God knows I try. Okay.
all right, let's switch to your latest book, Swimming in the Sacred. As I mentioned in the beginning, you interviewed 15 psychedelic elders, all women, each of whom had at least 20 years experience guiding in the underground. And
Yeah, well, that was my criteria,
yeah,
but
that's
in
the
fact, they
criteria.
really
Yeah,
had 40 years. They were
yeah,
much more. They were
yeah.
lifelong
Well,
practitioners.
I mean, this book is a treasure trove of insights and wisdom just for that reason. I mean, you call them priestesses.
Yes. They're not therapists. Took
Yeah.
me a while to let go of that assumption.
And since you didn't have experience with guided sessions when you started writing the book, I'm curious, where did the spark come from to write this book?
It came from the women. This was not my idea. One of the women, based on ayahuasca book, suggested I do it.
Well, and you write quite a bit about in the book about why you chose to only interview women for this book. Can you share a bit about what went into that decision?
Yeah, well, here's the personal statement is that I just didn't want to spend a lot of time, more time in my life listening to men pontificate. But well, actually what had happened was I think it was I went to the MAPS conference that was in San Jose, which I think was 2013, something
Yep.
like that.
I was there. Yeah.
And I spent an afternoon with one of the most respected underground practitioners, a man. And I got his whole story, and it was really, we had a wonderful afternoon together, and I respect him enormously, and it's different. It's different. The women talk about their work and their relationship to the plants differently. And I grew up when women couldn't get their own credit cards, right? And so I'm a little sensitive about, oh God, do I want to hear more mansplaining? And so some of it was personal, my own limitations, and some of it was I wanted more of that female relationship to the plant spirits.
Hey, fellow explorers. Thoughtful planning and preparation is the foundation of any successful psychedelic journey. And if something does go wrong, knowing how to navigate that difficult space is essential. That's why I wrote my psychedelic safety guide, including what to do when things go wrong. It's filled with tips and tools for keeping you and your friends as safe as possible. You'll find it at our website, psychedelicdivas.com. Please go get it, read it, and share it. The more we all know, the safer we can keep each other. Thanks. So you realize as you're writing the book, oh, I actually haven't done a guided psychedelic journey.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, earlier that you had done an MDMA journey and that you went sort of straight into ayahuasca space. But you talk about in that journey, you just surrendered to your mortality and you received a message. And it was a voice, again, that was that guide that said, you won't be alone. We'll
Mhm.
be with you. So what was the impact
Well,
of that
that's
message?
part there's a lot of working I mean, ayahuasca is called the vine of the dead. So there's a lot I think there's a lot in these medicines about preparing for your own mortality. Tony Bosis talks about dying before you die, quoting the Greek mystics. Uh, And so it's I think there's one of the benefits of working with these medicines is a different relationship to one's own mortality. And certainly e- everything about the Beatles talked about float downstream. Everything about letting go, trusting the process, going with it is part of the dying experience. And and so that was part of the teaching that I received in that session about death.
So there's a concept of surrender in medicine space. And
Right.
I think that's what scares people the most. Everyone's, the number one reason for not wanting to try psychedelics, I don't want to lose control. And
Well,
you,
ultimately we do lose control in the
right.
in the dying process. And so this is really good prep.
It's really good prep. And I always tell my clients, my integration clients, that control is illusory anyway. There is really no control.
Yeah.
Uh, but in the book, you quote Rosalind Watts, and she helped us prepare psilocybin patients for their journeys as part of the Imperial College studies. So she teaches a practice of letting go of mental control and surrendering to felt experience in the moment, which is not a skill that we are taught here in the
No.
West.
No.
And you go into a lot of detail about your experience with this practice of surrendering in your ayahuasca journeys.
Well,
Can
because I
you
had no choice.
Right, but the detail and the way that it comes on, can you sort of walk through that process? I've really found that fascinating because
Oh, now I have to
it's not
remember
my
what
experience.
did I say?
Well, there's this moment, so you can feel it doing like a body scan, and
Oh,
then there's
yeah.
like a metal hum, And there's an entire like I don't have this exact experience, and I would, if you can recreate that.
You know,
What is
I'll
that
go
like?
back to the Esalen residential program I was in. Different people tried to lead that program, and they had different orientations. And the orientation of the program I was in was body work and meditation. So there was a lot of focus on that capacity to tune in inside and sense different energy. When you turn into that inner world, what are you experiencing somatically? And it's not, people think they're asking us a somatic therapy question. They say, well, where do you feel it? Well, in my shoulder. No, that's a location. That's not an inner experience. So it's, how do you experience that sensation? What does that feel like? It's more the focusing questions, not just the location.
Hmm.
That's like the that's like a superficial somatic question that's not really very helpful and is much more likely to get an answer about where your latest aches and pains are. But what's the living experience in your body right now? How do you experience your energy field in your inner space, in your boundary, in your energy space around you? Those are the kinds of more subtle questions, asking about what's the lived experience. So for me, and it really does continue, this is what happens for me, is I can feel ayahuasca moving into me and then beginning a scan. And it is, since I've worked with this medicine, I've aged and have medical issues. And so I've experienced CAT scans. It is very, very similar. So, some people freak out in a CAT scan. I feel like, oh, I know this space. I've been here before. It's clanging, and I know that experience of being scanned, and I've come to sort of welcome. I almost said intrusion, but it's not an intrusion. To welcome the visit into my inner space that is scanning and looking for what needs to be worked on, or in a shamanic question of what needs to be extracted. Where
Hmm.
is there an issue? And this is about when my vision begins to change and I can see the patterns, that are the Shipipo patterns or the lights, the twinkling lights. So there's a real coming on and getting ready to do the work.
And so I've had many different experiences of coming onto ayahuasca, but when I think about surrendering to ayahuasca fully, it's my the one experience that comes to mind is, so I have my intentions, I have my whatever, right? And I'm lying down, and then all of a sudden I am being taken over in an extremely uncomfortable manner. And I'm realizing, oh, I'm not in control here.
No.
Okay. And like a puppy, I literally just rolled on my back and like gave my belly up, and I was like, I give, I surrender. Like an alpha dog in front on top of me. I was just like, "Mm,
Mhm.
I'm listening. You have my full attention." And as soon as I did that, everything relaxed.
Hmm.
Everything.
That's
She's like,
interesting.
yeah, she was like, this is not, this is, it was more her journey for me than
Mhm.
my journey for me.
Mhm. That's interesting.
And um, no other medicine
No.
has had that impact on me.
No, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's why I have such deep respect for her, and why I only go when I'm called. So, and there's been times when I've been offered, and then I'm like, I check in, I'm like, nope.
Mhm.
I've also been in groups where there was one time I was part of a women's group, and one of the women was leading ayahuasca, and I as my practice I checked in fully expecting a yes, and I got a no. You're not
Mhm.
supposed to participate. And I was like, okay. And normally in this group there was no sitters, and so I just said, well, I'll sit,
Mhm.
I'll help.
Mhm.
Well, it turned out that night was one of the most epic wind and thunder, rain ripping through storms in the yurt. The entire, I'm like, were all considering whether the yurt was going to hold with the level of
Mhm.
rain. I mean, it was magical, but it was also like it was
Yeah.
intense.
Right.
And to go to the bathroom, you had to go outside, right?
Oh God.
And so I was in deep service to
Yes.
everyone,
Uh-huh.
holding them over a bucket so that we didn't have to actually go, or walking them all the way up into the house if they had to actually use the bathroom. And, taking their socks off before we stepped out into the wet and then putting their socks back on and
Oh
tucking
boy.
them back in and drying them
Yeah.
off. And
Yeah.
that is where I needed to be, that,
Yeah.
that journey. And if I had not listened, if I had not asked the question,
Yeah.
then the service would not have been available. And I think, it would have been a very different experience for everybody.
For everybody.
So,
Yeah.
so very, very much I have learned through that power that she has to, I go in surrendered. I'm like, okay,
Right.
I'm on my back.
Right. Right.
I
And
give.
I'm hopeful. I mean, I don't know, but I'm hopeful that when it comes to my final days, that will be
Mhm.
helpful to me.
So what do
I
you think
mean,
about that? Like, you've spent a lot of time in ayahuasca space, in mortality,
yeah.
in all of that. So what have you learned?
I, j- I don't think I can put it in words, but it's the trusting of that process. There's a shift that happens so that the trust is in that I would trust the universe. I asked the shaman I work with where I have a personal relationship. When my time comes, will you come sing to me? And we'll work it out somehow. But there is that sense that I've been in that dark void, that starry sky, sort of
Yes. I-
crossing the river
ex-
Styx, that we
yes.
we recognize it.
Yes.
And he said he has sung many people across that night sky.
Yeah.
And so there's this real sense go of familiarity that I'm hopeful that will help me.
I was in an LSD journey in that space. And
Yeah,
wasn't having any particular thoughts. I was just floating in that space. And then it dawned on me that when I die, I was, I would be like, oh, I've been here before. This is,
that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
and of course I've been there before because there's been lifetimes of crossing back into that. But it was that
But
moment of
this is
like,
conscious.
right. I've been
Yeah.
here before, and it's just like that LSD journey, and it cracked me up. I was like, okay, all right, well,
Hmm.
we'll see how that
Yeah.
happens. But I
Yeah. I've
think
had a
I
practice run.
right.
Yeah. And I think when it comes right down to it, it's I don't know how to say this in a way to say it in a way that makes sense because it's not exactly a radical statement. But when it comes right down to it, it's all about love.
Hmm.
And so to be able to give yourself over to that and to trust it and
Yeah. So I want to talk about the concept of apprenticeship. So many of the elders in swimming in the sacred had the opportunity to apprentice with some of the early psychedelic pioneers. So my teacher, Ralph Metzner, Stan Groff, Leo Zeff, who was the secret chief, and Shulgin. And back when the women in the book got started, there weren't any psychedelic schools or training programs. So the only way to learn was through this more traditional deep dive of working with a master and learning from their time on the mat with those teachers. So I myself worked with Ralph for 22 years, and I also worked with one of the women you interviewed, Medrith, uh, who I've always referred to as a revered psychedelic elder who worked with both Ralph and Leo Zeff, the secret chief. So I think this concept of apprenticeship is one of the main things missing from the current psychedelic training programs. So, can you talk about what you learned about the importance of these apprenticeships from these women?
it's everything. And our culture doesn't we don't really have a place for this in our culture. so we don't understand it. So people say, well, I've been to the jungle many times. I'm trained. Well, no,
Nope. Try again.
no. Yeah. So, because an apprenticeship really takes years and it's a very gradual, it's really an adoption for one thing. It's a very personal relationship. And then it takes years and years. And so the programs that are online or lectures, series of lectures, they're informative, but that is not training. So our culture is missing something here. And we just don't seem to have a place and an understanding that there's a process of osmosing and what I call an apprenticeship is sitting at the elbow, that you're right there next to someone. And the shaman can say to you, "Did you see that?" Or you can say, "Is there a dragon there?" You can check out what you're seeing, and there can be confirmation. And people who have spent years in training talk about these kinds of testing. So, one woman who had been with a shaman for a long time, he dropped her off at another village to run a medical clinic. The medical clinic was healing with ayahuasca, and she doesn't speak Spanish even. And so it was about being thrown into the deep water and with some kind of supervision and feedback and learning. And so these things take years to be ready to do that. And then that takes a couple of more years even after you jump. So, in training psychotherapists, we used to have a one-way mirror or a one-way mirror then with a microphone set up so the supervisor can say, "Don't say that." Right? Um, and that's sort of, we really need that kind of hand-holding at the very beginning, and that so, I have a dear friend who's a Jungian analyst, and he's been in training for 7, 8 years now with the Shipipo shaman, and they call him a maestro. The shaman family considers him a maestro, but he knows he's half-baked. He's not he knows he needs more years, and so it takes a long time, and we as Westerners, we have that disadvantage of not growing up in that culture and living with that reality of these other worlds. We're
No, we
slower.
have
We're
the
s
opposite, which is you
Yeah.
go to school, you read a book, and now you have a PhD,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you know everything because
Yeah, right. So,
at least in medical school you were actually doing hands-on.
there is that. So there are a couple of things that I'm concerned about that are getting lost, and that is the concept of ongoing supervision and working with medicines over a long period of time. Y Yes, we came up with a protocol that happens within a 3-month period. There's a little leeway with, well, you might have 3 integration sessions, maybe 4. There's a little chance to spread it out. But the way these medicines are used in the underground is people use them over years. They come back, maybe it's once or twice a year, maybe they bring their mother, maybe they bring a spouse. I mean, I've sat in ayahuasca ceremonies with 3 generations of a family, and it's wonderful to just even be in the same room with a family that does that. So, there are lots of different ways that the medicines unfold over time, and that's just not researchable.
No.
But we have to remember that the research protocol is not the whole thing.
No, the research protocol is a very thin slice, and unfortunately, because of the way we're trying to get things approved, it's now becoming it's becoming a bigger slice of the pie than it actually is or should be.
Right, right. So
So,
it's sort of how the medicines are being squeezed into a
yeah,
research protocol to
right.
get government approval,
Hmm.
but the naturalistic use of these medicines is quite different.
So you mentioned in the book the important axiom in psychedelics and in therapy that you can't take someone where you haven't been, which you translate to meaning work on yourself first. So I was really interested. One of the women in the book was like deeply schooled by her mentor because she served a medicine combo that she herself had not tried yet. And her mentor told her she was forbidden from serving medicine for 12 months as a result.
Right?
And it's
That's pretty
hard,
serious.
yeah, it's
Now,
hard to
where is
imagine
that going to happen now?
exactly where there's no way that we have, I can't even imagine that level of diligence and discipline in the current model of psychedelic trainings. So, what can you tell us about the importance of you can't take
So
someone
one
where
way
you
this is
haven't been?
coming up is there's controversy within the training community. And the question is, does the psychedelic therapist need to have their own psychedelic experience?
Right.
So I saved this. Where did I put it? So here's a recent article, 2025. It's very recent. It's got 16 authors from all over the world. It's Journal of Psychopharmacology, a model training curriculum for psychedelic, psycholytic, and entactogen assisted psychotherapy.
Sounds very official. Yes.
It's very official. You can see the list of authors. They must have had a hell of a fight over this question. And they report on a lot of things about that should be included. But the question of does the therapist need their own experience with a psychedelic? They do not take a stand. So
Wow.
there were two sides here that they
Right.
couldn't come to one opinion.
Right.
So some people said no, they don't need to have that experience. And then other people said yes, they definitely need
Right.
some experience. So what's some experience? A couple of sessions. The experts, the underground women had many, many experiences. So even to have
Yeah.
a couple, I
I,
don't know what to say about it.
I
But so this
know.
is it's a very current academic question. To me, it should be a no-brainer. Don't you have the guts to come out and say they should be experienced? And then
Right.
another issue that was not dealt with in that article is there's controversy over should the sitter under the influence to help them, this is the rationale, to
Mm.
help them tune into the client. So a tiny little microdose or
Right.
something. And my position is if they don't know how to tune into, if they don't have enough experience in these realms themselves so that they can access it and be able to tune into the client even without the chemical, then they shouldn't be doing this work. They should be able to do this.
That's,
And
that's a
I know there's controversy here.
right. I'd like to talk about that because that's a really interesting perspective. So in the groups that I did with Ralph, he always joined in. And
Of course he
not
did.
always right. But let me tell you the impact of that, okay? Because there were in my world there were two Ralphs. There was professorial Ralph,
Yeah.
okay, he was the teacher. He was also a little dry, right?
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
okay. But at night, when he's led the groups and he joined in, then he became master of the cosmos, Ralph. Then he was channeling, okay? He was leaning back with his eyes closed and just because Ralph spoke during, I should
Yes.
clarify that Ralph
Yes.
always did guided journeys in his group work, and which is very different than the current model, but it was something that was, I actually found it when Ralph was on and tuned in with the help of the medicine, he was transcendent. And as he aged, he started cutting back, and I could feel that connection start to wobble. And then at the very end, his last couple groups, he wasn't using the medicine at all. And it was missing that
I'm sorry to hear that.
that connection to source. I mean, I'm still saying, Ralph was always a beautiful guide, but he was relaxed, he was tuned in, he was channeling the universe. And that ca- he wasn't capable of doing without being on the
Well,
medicine.
in a way, that's the indigenous model,
Right.
right? Because the indigenous shaman
They
are drinking. So in a
right.
way, that's the indigenous model. And I would never interfere with that.
Right.
Talking about a psychedelic therapy session. And one of the elders just had a rule that somebody needs to be straight. So
Yeah.
there's that, just for
Right.
safety.
Right.
So I think it depends what what model you're working with. That
Mhm.
I would never touch an indigenous model
Right.
with this comment. But if it's a therapeutic kind of setting, then I think it behooves the therapist to be able to travel with or without the medicine.
All right. I think that
And if someone has trouble doing that, they need
mhm.
a lot more medicine journeys.
I 100% agree
And,
with that. Yes.
and I can't believe that this paper came out and they couldn't agree to
Right.
take a stand
Yes.
and say that.
So you start the book with a memory from childhood. It's the 1950s, and you're taking a 15-minute private ride in a prop plane that your mom arranged for you and your brother's birthdays. So, obviously it's a rare treat in the 1950s to fly. And you say it gave you an entirely new viewpoint on life. And then you link that to the medicine work, and you say that entirely new viewpoint is the gift of the medicine as well. So, what do you want people to know who are just getting started in their psychedelic journey, either as a participant or as a guide? What's the entirely new viewpoint you'd like them to come away with as a result of all of these deep dive
I think
interviews?
the medicine offers the opportunity for us to be more flexible in our patterns of perception and thinking. And so a viewpoint is perception. So to learn flexibility with our viewpoints is really helpful in life.
Mm.
There's actually a therapy that just really focuses on flexibility. So I think that's really a key. And I just, I was a child. And I was totally entranced with being able to see the apartment building where we lived from up high. I mean, it was, my mother was unusual in many ways. This was an unusual birthday gift. Um, and it had a huge impact on me. And the medicines offer us that opportunity as well to look at our lives differently, to look at our relationships differently, to look at ourselves differently so we're not locked into our ego identification, that there's flexibility there also. We can move in and out of it. That's a wonderful gift to have
Yeah.
that kind of fluidity and not be stuck in the way most of us are stuck with this is what I think, this is what I believe, this is how I am. It's sort of a rigidity about how we perceive ourselves, our relationship to life. So that fluidity is really valuable. And the medicines, that's, I think, part of what we can learn from them.
I had the same experience because my dad was a private pilot. And
Oh,
when I was a kid, he co-owned a Bonanza, and I, as a
well,
kid,
how exciting.
I got to fly it.
Wow. Yeah,
uh,
right.
yeah. So I grew up in Florida, and Alligator Alley is just a
Yeah.
straight line through the Keys. And so when we would go, my mother would drive one of us to where we were going to spend time on the beach on the other coast. So we'd have the car there, and then one of us would fly with my dad. And so
Uh-huh.
I remember, one time on the way back, he put the steering, in my, so, and it was
Yeah.
basically like, it's a straight line. He's like, just follow Alligator Alley.
Right.
And so I was probably 8, and it's that moment
Oh,
of
what a
just
thrill.
totally. And I
Yeah.
spent a lot of time at air shows and
Right.
in the world of aviation because of my dad's. In fact, flying is particularly linked to my psychedelic. world because in one of the journeys, Ralph asked us to ask our guides, what our life purpose was
Uh-huh.
in this life, and what came to me was that I was here to teach people to fly.
Mm.
And so these are not angel wings
Mhm.
behind me, although I'm sure they also are, but they're my wings,
Uh-huh.
and they're the wings that I'm giving my clients
Uh-huh.
to teach them, to have that experience that you just described,
Mhm.
uh, to be able to see things from a different perspective. So,
Isn't it interesting how experiences from childhood that we may not even realize back then as children, how determining they are, how important they
hmm
are for our whole lives. Yeah.
oh, we laid the breadcrumbs, absolutely, for where we're going.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
I
and
I think we as a culture need to take children more seriously
hmm
with these kinds of experiences.
I agree. Rachel, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast.
Oh,
It
it's
was
been
just
fun.
it's an honor and a pleasure. Can you tell people how they can find you and support your work?
Well, you can find the books on the internet, the
hmm
websites.
And there'll be
From
links to there'll be
the
links to the
title
books in
of
the show notes. Yeah.
yeah, there is, but it's the title of each book has the website, and then they
hmm
can email me through those websites.
Okay, great.
And I do eventually answer most of the emails I get.
Oh, that's impressive.
I mean,
Okay.
I miss some, but I get most. So that's a way they can always reach me.
All right. Perfect. And thank you to all of you for listening and for your support. If you found this conversation to be helpful in any way, please, if you wouldn't mind, just take a moment to go to wherever you're listening or watching and click on the 5 stars or provide a nice comment or a thumbs up. This feedback is how we spread the word and helpful, safe information about the psychedelic world. And speaking of safety, I know I do this every time, but thank you for listening, for your feedback about my safety guide, which includes critical information about what to do when things go wrong. So please go check it out at psychedelicdivas.com. It might be just the thing you need if things should go sideways. And as always, thank you for your support and for listening. I so appreciate you all. And thanks again, Rachel.
Thanks, Carla.